You are the master of your fate. Let's begin. There's a quiet robbery happening in your mind every time you open your mouth to explain why you're doing what you're doing, why you made that decision, why you're walking this path, why you believe it's right. And most people never even realize it's occurring because it doesn't come with sirens or force, only with words that seem harmless, even necessary. I've watched countless men and women, bright with potential, pour their energy into convincing others of their choices, thinking they're building understanding, when in truth they're dismantling their own resolve brick by brick with every justification they offer. You see, when you find yourself repeatedly explaining your purpose, your plan, or your boundary, you're not defending your position, you're weakening it, because the act of explanation pulls you back into doubt, even if you were certain just moments before. I once sat across from a young man who had finally gathered the courage to leave a stable job and start a business he truly believed in, and instead of celebrating that decision or quietly beginning the work, he spent an entire evening at dinner carefully laying out his reasoning to a friend who hadn't even questioned him, detailing the market research, the financial projections, the personal sacrifices, as if he needed approval to live his own life. He walked away having won no real victory, only feeling drained, hollow, as though something vital had been taken from him, and it had. That energy, that fire, that quiet certainty that had driven him to act in the first place had been spent in conversation that served no purpose other than to soothe his own fear of standing alone. And that, my friend, is the silent theft, not someone stealing your dream, but you surrendering the power behind it piece by piece in the form of words meant to pacify others who will never walk your path. I'm not suggesting you become closed off or indifferent to feedback, but there comes a moment in every person's development when they must learn that clarity does not require consensus and conviction should never be up for debate. In the years I spent studying men like Carnegie and Edison, I never once heard them justify their moves to people who didn't share their vision because they understood something most still miss today, that the moment you feel the need to explain your purpose, you've already begun to lose it. So I ask you now, before we go any further, when was the last time you explained something you already knew to be true, not because the other person needed to understand, but because you needed to feel safe in your own decision? That need, that impulse, is where we begin. There's a hidden price tag attached to every explanation you feel compelled to give, and it's not measured in words or time, but in something far more valuable: your mental energy, your focus, and the quiet certainty that must fuel any lasting achievement. Most people operate under the illusion that explaining themselves protects their position, that it builds bridges or earns respect. But the truth, which I've observed in hundreds of lives across decades of study, is that justification rarely changes minds and almost always weakens the one doing the justifying. When you find yourself laying out reasons, defenses, and caveats for your decisions, especially to those who haven't earned the right to question them, you're not reinforcing your resolve, you're inviting doubt back into the room, even if that room is only inside your own mind. I've seen ambitious men on the verge of breakthroughs stall completely because they spent months, sometimes years, trying to make others understand their vision, as if understanding were a prerequisite to action, when in fact the opposite is true. Action creates understanding, not the other way around. Think of the last time you explained why you were making a change, perhaps leaving a job, starting a new habit, setting a boundary, and then pay attention to how you felt afterward. Did you feel stronger, more centered, or did you feel a subtle erosion, a slight wobble in your confidence, as though the very act of defending your choice made it seem less solid? That's not coincidence, it's psychology. Every time you repeat your reasons, you're rehearsing the possibility of being wrong, and the mind believes what it hears most often, even if it's coming from your own voice. I once worked with a woman who had a clear plan to launch a service that addressed a real need in her community, but before she began, she told everyone, family, friends, former colleagues, exactly why it would work, how she'd fund it, why now was the time. She thought she was building support, but what she was really doing was diffusing the intensity of her own drive. By the time she finally started, the fire had dimmed, not because the idea was flawed, but because she had talked about it so much that it began to feel abstract, distant, like something already completed in conversation, rather than something that needed to be built in reality. And here's the deeper truth. People don't respect what's easily explained. They respect what's confidently lived. When you act without apology, when you move with quiet determination, you create a presence that commands attention far more than any argument ever could. The cost of justification, then, is not just wasted energy, it's delayed results, weakened resolve, and the slow erosion of that inner authority that all great achievers must protect above all else. So ask yourself, how much of your power have you given away in the form of explanations that changed nothing and helped no one? Not even you. Beneath every explanation that spills from your lips when no one has asked for it, there lies a fear far deeper than the simple worry of being misunderstood. It is the fear of standing alone in your truth, of holding a conviction without approval, of moving forward while the voices around you remain silent or skeptical. Most people believe they explain themselves to gain acceptance, to be seen as reasonable or justified. But I've come to understand through years of observation and conversation with those who've achieved lasting greatness that the real motive is not external at all. It is an internal reflex, a subconscious attempt to soothe the discomfort of uncertainty by seeking validation from others who carry none of the responsibility for your life. You don't need them to understand, you need yourself to feel safe in the decision. And since true confidence is hard-won and often fragile in its early stages, you substitute it with the temporary relief of agreement. But here's what happens when you rely on that crutch. The moment someone pushes back, questions your logic, or simply fails to respond with enthusiasm, that safety dissolves, and you're left not only defending your choice, but questioning it all over again. I've watched intelligent, capable people unravel under the weight of their own explanations, not because their ideas were flawed, but because they had outsourced the authority of their decisions to the opinions of others. The truth is, if you require permission to pursue your purpose, you will never move with the speed, clarity, or power that true achievement demands. I remember speaking with a man who had spent 2 years explaining his business idea to anyone who would listen, refining his pitch, adjusting his model based on feedback, trying to make it bulletproof before he took action. When I asked him why he hadn't started, he said, "I want people to get it." I looked at him and said, "What if they never do? Will you wait forever?" He hadn't considered that possibility because he had confused readiness with consensus. But purpose is not a democracy. It does not require a majority vote. And the longer you wait for understanding, the more you signal to your own mind that your decision is still up for debate. That hesitation, that need to be validated, is not a sign of thoughtfulness. It is a sign of unprocessed fear. Not of failure necessarily, but of isolation, of being the only one who sees it, of moving while others stand still. And yet every major advancement in human history began with someone standing alone in their certainty, not because they were arrogant, but because they knew that no amount of explanation could replace the authority of action. So when you feel the urge to explain, don't reach for your reasons, reach for the truth beneath them. You are afraid of being alone with your decision. And that's not weakness, it's human, but it must not be allowed to dictate your pace. You tell yourself that when you explain your choices, your career move, your boundary, your dream, you are taking control of the narrative, shaping how others see you, steering their perception in a direction that feels safe and favorable. But what you're really doing is surrendering control, not to them, but to the unpredictable currents of their reactions, their moods, their biases, their limitations. You cannot manage how people interpret your life, no matter how carefully you phrase your words or how many reasons you provide. The human mind does not respond to logic in the way we assume it does, especially when emotions, envy, or insecurity are in play. And the more you try to control their understanding, the more you place your peace in their hands. I've seen men craft flawless arguments for their decisions, lay out every detail with precision, only to be met with dismissal, misunderstanding, or indifference, not because their reasoning was weak, but because the other person wasn't ready to receive it. And in that moment, something inside the explainer breaks. Not the idea, not the plan, but the confidence behind it, because they had tied their sense of validity to an outcome they could not control, another person's approval. This is the great deception of justification. It makes you believe you are protecting yourself when in fact you are exposing your inner state to forces you cannot predict or command. True control does not come from managing opinions, it comes from mastering your own response to them. When Rockefeller made the decision to consolidate his rail operations, he didn't call a press conference, he didn't gather his peers to explain why it was necessary, he acted. And when questioned later, he said simply, "I saw the path, I took it." He understood that his responsibility was not to convince, but to decide and to bear the consequences, whatever they might be. That is power. Not the power to make others agree, but the power to move without their permission. Most people today operate in reverse. They wait to feel safe before they act, when in truth, safety is not a prerequisite for action, it is a result of it. The more you act decisively, the more your mind learns to trust itself, and the less you care about whether others get it. You begin to see that their reaction is not a reflection of your worth or wisdom, but of their own capacity to see beyond their immediate world. And when you stop investing energy in shaping that reaction, you reclaim it for what matters: the work, the vision, the quiet momentum of a life lived on purpose. So ask yourself, are you trying to control how others see you because you're afraid of what might happen if they don't approve? And if so, what would it mean for your life if you finally accepted that you can never control their response, only your resolve? There was a quiet strength in the men I studied, Carnegie, Edison, Ford. not because they were immune to doubt or criticism, but because they had made a fundamental decision early on. Their purpose was not subject to public review. I remember sitting with Andrew Carnegie one evening at his estate, long after he had stepped away from the steel empire he built, and I asked him why he never engaged in public disputes about his decisions, why he allowed critics to call him ruthless, greedy, or reckless without offering a single defense. He looked out over the garden, silent for a moment, then said, "Napoleon, when you spend your life building something that lasts, you stop measuring yourself by the opinions of those who only pass through." That moment stayed with me, not because it was dramatic, but because it revealed a principle far too few understand. True achievement does not beg for context, it provides it through existence. Carnegie didn't explain why he consolidated his mills or why he sold at the peak. He simply did it, and the results spoke with a clarity no argument ever could. Edison was the same. When reporters mocked his experiments, calling them wasteful, impossible, the work of a man chasing ghosts, he didn't write rebuttals or hold press conferences to justify his methods. He stayed in the lab, he worked through the night, and when the filament finally glowed, the world stopped asking why he kept trying and started asking how he did it. That shift from resistance to recognition does not come from persuasion, it comes from persistence. I've watched modern men and women do the opposite. They announce their dreams prematurely, then spend the months that follow defending them, exhausting their energy in conversations that go nowhere, trying to convince people who haven't felt the fire they carry. But you cannot transfer conviction through words. It is not a currency, it is an internal condition, and the moment you treat it as something that needs approval, you diminish its power. Ford didn't explain the Model T to the world before it existed, he built it. He didn't justify paying workers $5 a day when every economist said it would ruin him, he implemented it. And when the factories hummed with loyalty and productivity while competitors struggled to retain labor, the explanation became irrelevant. The result was the reply. This is the mindset of the builder, the creator, the leader. They do not set their course by the wind of public opinion. They set it by an internal compass calibrated to purpose, not popularity. And when you study their lives closely, you see a patterned silence in the beginning, action in the middle, recognition at the end. No debates, no defenses, no need to be understood before they were finished. So I ask you now, are you spending more time explaining your vision than fulfilling it? Are you seeking permission from people who will never share your burden, never invest what you invest, never suffer what you're willing to endure? Because if so, you are not honoring the legacy of those who came before you. You are imitating the habits of those who remain stuck, forever preparing, forever justifying, never arriving. The greats didn't rise because they were agreed with, they rose because they refused to be diverted. And that same path is open to you, but only if you're willing to walk it without commentary. Not all silence is born from the same place, nor does it carry the same weight, because silence, like any human behavior, can be either an act of strength or a retreat from it. I've come to recognize two distinct forms in the lives of those I've studied: the silence of avoidance and the silence of resolve. The first is weak, born of fear, hesitation, or the inability to stand firm in one's truth. It is the quiet of someone who knows what they believe but lacks the courage to hold it without approval. This kind of silence is fragile, temporary, and often followed by bursts of over-explanation when the pressure builds. It is not peace, but suppression. The second kind, the silence of the truly decisive, is different. It is deliberate, grounded, unshakable. It does not come from disengagement, but from deep alignment with purpose. It is the stillness of a man who knows where he is going and no longer feels the need to announce it at every turn. I've seen young men fall into the first kind unknowingly, mistaking their reluctance to speak for wisdom, when in fact they were simply afraid of conflict or rejection. They would say nothing when questioned, not because they were centered, but because they were uncertain and hoped silence would be interpreted as strength. But silence without conviction is transparent. People feel the lack of substance behind it. True power does not hide, it simply refuses to perform. The men I knew who changed industries, who built legacies, who moved through opposition without breaking stride, were not silent because they had nothing to say. They were silent because they understood that not every moment requires a response, and not every opinion deserves access to their inner world. Edison, for all his brilliance, was not a man of many words in public, but when he spoke, it was with precision, timing, and intent. The rest of the time, he conserved his energy. He didn't waste breath defending his process because he was too busy living it. That is the essence of strong silence. It is not passive, it is strategic. It protects focus. It guards vision. It allows the mind to remain undisturbed by the noise of casual judgment. And over time, this kind of silence begins to shape how others treat you, not with suspicion, but with respect. They learn that when you do speak, it matters. When you act, it counts. There is no need to fill space with justification because your presence alone carries weight. So before you assume that speaking up is always courage and silence always fear, consider this: the most powerful people I've ever known were not the loudest in the room. They were the ones who listened deeply, spoke sparingly, and moved with such quiet certainty that others instinctively stepped aside. That is not avoidance, that is authority in its purest form. And if you wish to reclaim your power from the habit of over-explaining, you must first learn to distinguish between the silence that weakens you and the silence that strengthens you, because only the latter can carry you to where you're meant to go. The habit of over-explaining doesn't announce itself with drama or fanfare. It slips in quietly, almost invisibly, through a single sentence: "Let me explain why," and once that door opens, the flood begins. It happens in the smallest moments, when you tell a friend you're starting a business and immediately add, "I know it's risky, but here's why I think it can work." When you decline an invitation and follow it with a detailed account of your schedule, values, or priorities. When you share a goal and instinctively soften it with disclaimers, as if to say, "I'm not arrogant, I'm just trying." These are not isolated incidents, they are patterns, and each one marks the precise moment when your confidence, however strong it may have been a second before, begins to bend under the weight of imagined scrutiny. What makes this trigger so dangerous is that it feels necessary, even responsible. You tell yourself you're being clear, considerate, thorough. But if you examine the impulse closely, you'll find it's rarely about the other person at all. It's about your own need to feel justified, to preempt criticism, to avoid the discomfort of being seen as impulsive, selfish, or uncertain. And in that instant, you shift from living your decision to defending it. And the more you defend, the more you invite challenge, even when none was offered. I've watched this unfold in countless conversations. A man declares he's leaving his job to start over, and before the sentence is even finished, he's already listing reasons, financial backup plans, market research, support from family, as if the declaration itself isn't enough. The irony is that without those explanations, the statement would carry more weight. There is power in a simple, unqualified "I'm doing this," but the moment you add "because," you imply that the action depends on the validity of your reasoning, and that opens the door for doubt, both in their mind and, more importantly, in your own. This trigger is especially strong when the decision touches identity, career, relationships, personal growth. These are not just choices, they are reflections of who you believe yourself to be, and when you feel that identity is at risk of misinterpretation, the urge to clarify becomes nearly automatic. Yet the people who command the most respect in life are not those who explain every move, but those who make their moves and let them stand. They understand that clarity does not come from volume or detail, but from consistency over time. No one questions the surgeon's authority when she walks into the operating room without justifying her training. No one demands that the architect defend his design before the first blueprint is drawn. Why? Because competence, once established, speaks for itself, and even when it's just beginning, it must be allowed to grow in silence, protected from the erosion of constant defense. So the real work begins not in grand declarations, but in these small, everyday moments when the words rise in your throat, when the reflex to justify activates. That is your signal. That is the trigger. And in that breath before you speak, you must ask yourself, am I adding value or am I seeking safety? Because if it's the latter, you are not protecting your position, you are weakening it, one unnecessary explanation at a time. It would be easy to believe that the compulsion to explain oneself is a new phenomenon, born of our hyper-connected age. But the truth is, the impulse has always existed. What has changed is the frequency, the scale, and the invisible pressures that now amplify it. In my time, a man might have to defend his choices to family, neighbors, or business associates, small, defined circles. Today, you face an audience that is endless, faceless, and relentless. Social media, group chats, comment sections, public forums where opinions are delivered with the force of verdicts, and silence is interpreted as guilt or insecurity. The modern world has not created the need for approval, but it has multiplied the triggers that set it off, turning what was once an occasional moment of doubt into a constant background hum of self-justification. You post a photo of your new venture, and within minutes someone asks, "How are you making money at that?" And suddenly you're typing out a paragraph about your business model, not because they're a potential client, but because their question stirred a fear. What if they think I'm naive? You announce a personal decision, quitting a job, starting a fitness journey, changing your lifestyle, and instead of simply living it, you find yourself crafting captions that read like legal defenses. I know this isn't for everyone, but here's why it makes sense for me, as if life requires a disclaimer before it can be lived. This is not communication, it is performance. And the most insidious part is that you begin to internalize the habit, so that even in private conversations with people who love you and mean you no harm, you still feel compelled to over-explain, because the reflex has been conditioned by months, even years, of justifying yourself to strangers. I've seen young entrepreneurs spend more time writing posts about their vision than executing it, mistaking engagement for progress, comments for validation, and likes for momentum. But real growth does not happen in the comments section. It happens in the quiet hours, in the unseen labor, in the decisions made without an audience. The modern triggers are subtle but powerful: the raised eyebrow at a family dinner, the passive-aggressive question from a friend, so, how's that side hustle going? The unspoken judgment in a colleague's tone when you say you're leaving for something different. These moments don't demand an explanation, but your nervous system treats them like emergencies, triggering a response as if your survival were at stake. And so you speak, not to inform, but to pacify, to prove, to control the narrative before it's twisted. But here's what you must understand: the world does not reward those who explain the most. It rewards those who deliver the most. The man who builds in silence, who acts without commentary, who accumulates results without fanfare, that is the man who eventually commands attention without asking for it. Social media didn't invent insecurity, but it gave it a megaphone. Comparison didn't start yesterday, but now it happens hourly, even minute by minute, as you scroll through curated lives that seem more certain, more successful, more together than your own. And in that environment, the temptation to explain yourself becomes a form of armor, a way to say, I'm not behind, I'm not lost, I have a plan. But armor weighs you down, and the heavier your words become with justification, the slower your progress will be. So I ask you, how many of your explanations are really answers to questions no one asked? How much of your energy is being spent not on building, but on convincing people, many of whom will never take the same risks you do, that your path is valid? Because if you wait for their approval, you will wait forever. The modern world will not quiet down, the noise will not stop. The only power you have is in your response, to recognize the trigger, to feel the impulse, and to choose deliberately to act without apology. Not out of pride, not out of defiance, but out of loyalty to your own purpose. The moment you catch yourself beginning to explain, when the old reflex rises and you feel the familiar urge to justify your choice, your pace, your path, that is not a failure. It is an opportunity, an invitation to shift not just what you say, but how you see yourself in relation to your decisions. Most people treat this moment as a social dilemma. How do I make them understand? But the real question is far more personal. Am I living from direction, or am I reacting to doubt, mine or theirs? Because every time you explain, you are making a silent choice about where your authority resides. Is it within you, rooted in a clear purpose and a quiet confidence? Or is it out there, in the hands of others, dependent on their nod, their approval, their silence? The reframe I offer you now is not a trick of language, but a transformation of mindset, one that moves you from a posture of defense to one of unwavering direction. Instead of asking, how can I make them see why this is right, begin asking, what must I do next to move closer to my goal? That subtle shift changes everything. It pulls your focus from external validation to internal momentum. It stops you from pouring energy into the past, defending a decision already made, and redirects it toward the future, building what only you can build. I've watched men paralyzed by the need to be understood waste years crafting arguments, while their vision gathers dust, while others, equally uncertain at first, simply began. They didn't wait for clarity to come from outside. They knew it would come from motion, and as they moved, the noise around them lost its power, not because the critics disappeared, but because their own sense of purpose grew louder than the doubt. This is not about arrogance or isolation. It is about stewardship. You are the guardian of your time, your energy, your vision. And when you realize how precious those things are, you stop scattering them in conversations that go nowhere. You stop treating every casual question as a challenge to your legitimacy. You begin to see that your focus is not infinite, and every word spent defending your path is a word stolen from building it. The reframe is this: your life is not a case to be argued, it is a mission to be lived. When you see it that way, justification no longer feels necessary, it feels wasteful. Think of a ship leaving port. It doesn't pause to explain its destination to everyone on the shore. It doesn't adjust its course because someone waves in confusion or shouts a warning from the beach. It follows the compass, the charts, the captain's intent. And over time, those on land may not understand the journey, but they will see the wake. They will notice the distance covered. They will witness the arrival. That is how true progress speaks, not in preemptive explanations, but in undeniable results. So the next time you feel the pull to defend yourself, pause, not to suppress the feeling, but to redirect it. Ask, is this explanation serving my mission or slowing it? If the answer is the latter, then close the loop in your mind, not in conversation. Hold the truth silently. I know why I'm doing this. That is enough. Then turn your full attention back to the work, because the world does not need your reasons, it needs your results. And the faster you stop proving you're capable, the sooner you'll become what no explanation could ever make you, undeniable. There comes a point in every person's growth when they must learn the discipline of restraint, not in action, but in speech. For most, the impulse to over-explain is not born of weakness, but of a sincere desire to be understood, to bridge the gap between their inner conviction and the uncertainty of others. And while that intention may be noble, the effect is almost always counterproductive. The more you speak to clarify, the more you invite debate, the more you detail your reasons, the more you open the door for doubt to enter, not just in their mind, but in your own. That is why I offer you this simple, powerful tool, the one-sentence rule. It is not a suppression of truth, but a refinement of it. From this moment forward, when you feel the need to explain a decision, any decision, large or small, allow yourself only one clear, unapologetic sentence. No qualifiers, no disclaimers, no extended rationale. Just one statement that reflects your resolve, then silence. That is all. For example, if someone asks why you're leaving your job to start something new, you say, I'm making this move because it aligns with my purpose. If questioned about a boundary you've set, you respond, this is what I need to protect my focus. If challenged on a goal that seems uncertain to them, I've decided this is the path I'm taking. That is it. No follow-up, no elaboration, no descent into justification. The power of this rule lies not in what it allows, but in what it denies. It denies the mind its favorite escape route from discomfort, the endless loop of explanation that masquerades as communication, but is really avoidance. It forces you to distill your truth to its essence, which in turn strengthens your internal clarity. When you can't hide behind paragraphs of reasoning, you must confront whether you truly believe in your choice. And if you do, one sentence is enough. If you don't, no number of words will make it true. I've seen this rule transform hesitant dreamers into decisive builders, not because it changes their circumstances, but because it changes their relationship to them. One man used it when announcing his decision to relocate for a new opportunity. Instead of delivering a 10-minute monologue about cost of living, career growth, and family dynamics, he said simply, this is where I need to be to grow. He expected pushback. What he got was silence, then, days later, quiet respect. People didn't argue with him because there was nothing to argue against. A statement of intent is not an invitation to debate. It is a declaration of direction. And when you speak that way, with brevity and certainty, others begin to treat your decisions differently. They may not understand, but they stop questioning. Not because you convinced them, but because you stopped making your choices negotiable. The one-sentence rule is not about being cold or dismissive. It is about being focused. It is about recognizing that your energy is finite, and every extra word spent defending the past is one less word, one less thought, one less act you can give to the future. Over time, this practice trains your mind to operate from a place of quiet authority. You stop seeking permission. You stop measuring your validity by the reactions of others. You learn to carry your certainty like a quiet flame, one that doesn't need to be blown on by approval to keep burning. So begin today. The next time you feel the old urge rise, the need to explain, to justify, to manage how you're perceived, pause, breathe, then speak your one sentence if you must speak at all, and then, without apology, return to your work. Let your actions, not your explanations, become the story you tell. There comes a moment in every serious person's development when reading about strength is no longer enough. They must practice it, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, everyday choices where true discipline is forged. That moment is now. I want you to step into a space most avoid, the discomfort of being misunderstood without rushing to correct it. I want you to experience what it feels like to hold your truth without announcing it, to make decisions without defending them, to move forward without checking whether others approve. To do this, I give you a simple yet profoundly revealing assignment, the 24-hour silence challenge. For one full day, you will not explain, justify, or defend any decision you make, no matter how small, no matter who asks. This is not about secrecy or withdrawal. It is about sovereignty. It is about reclaiming the energy you've been giving away in the form of words that change nothing and protect no one, not even your own peace. When someone asks why you're doing what you're doing, you will respond with either silence, a neutral acknowledgement, or one clear sentence, no more. You will not elaborate. You will not soften your choice with disclaimers. You will not preempt criticism by over-clarifying. You will simply be in your decision as if it requires no validation to exist. Imagine ordering a meal different from the rest of the table and not saying, I'm trying to eat cleaner, or I don't really like that dish, just I'll have the grilled salmon. Imagine declining an invitation and not listing 3 reasons why your schedule is full, just I won't be able to make it. Imagine sharing a goal and not rushing to add, it's probably going to fail, but I want to try, or I know it sounds crazy, but just, this is what I'm working on. Watch what happens. Not in their reaction, but in you. Because the real test is not how others respond, it is how you handle the internal pressure, the rising urge to explain, the subtle fear that without justification you might be seen as arrogant, impulsive, or indifferent. That discomfort is not a sign you're doing something wrong, it is a sign you're touching the root of the habit. That tension is where growth begins. Most people spend their lives avoiding this feeling, mistaking it for social failure, when in truth, it is the friction of personal power forming. As the day unfolds, you may notice something surprising. People don't fall apart when you don't explain. The world does not collapse. Conversations continue, relationships remain intact, and in some cases, respect quietly increases, not because you were cold, but because you were clear. Boundaries without apology are not harsh, they are healthy. And the more you practice holding them, the more natural they become. This challenge is not meant to be done once and forgotten. It is a window into a new way of being. After 24 hours, reflect. Where did the urge to explain arise? What decisions felt hardest to leave undefended? What did you learn about your own need for approval? And most importantly, how much mental energy did you retain by not engaging in unnecessary justification? That energy is not lost. It is now available for focus, for creativity, for action. This is how you begin to build a life that doesn't bend to every opinion, but moves forward with quiet, unshakable momentum. So I ask you, are you ready to stop performing your purpose and start living it? Then take the challenge. Begin tomorrow or today. It doesn't matter when, only that you do. Because mastery is not found in words. It is found in what you don't say and what you do instead. There is a quiet voice inside you that speaks before you act, sometimes in wisdom, sometimes in fear, and you may not realize it, but you are listening to it every day. It is not the voice you hear aloud, but the one that runs beneath your choices, shaping your responses before they leave your lips. When you feel the urge to explain yourself, that voice is already at work, whispering variations of the same old story. They won't understand. What if they think I'm reckless? I should make sure they know my reasons left unchallenged. This inner dialogue becomes a habit, a reflex, a prison built of good intentions and misplaced concern. But here's the truth I learned from years of studying men who refuse to be swayed. The mind obeys the scripts you repeat most often. If you feed it fear, it will produce hesitation. If you feed it certainty, it will generate resolve. That is why at this stage in your development, you must install a new inner script, one that does not defend, but anchors, one that does not seek approval, but reinforces purpose. This is not positive thinking, it is strategic self-leadership. The script I offer you is simple, but not easy. My results will speak. My silence will protect them. Say it slowly the first time. Let it settle. This is not a slogan. It is a declaration of allegiance to your work, to your timing, to your right to move without commentary. When you feel the old pull to justify, do not argue with it. Do not fight it. Simply replace it. Repeat this phrase silently, like a steady drumbeat beneath the noise. Let it become the counterweight to your instinct to over-explain. You don't need to believe it fully at first. You only need to use it. Repetition will build conviction. I've seen this work with entrepreneurs, artists, leaders, people who had spent years exhausting themselves trying to make others see their vision, only to discover that the moment they stopped explaining and started repeating this truth inwardly, their external presence changed. They didn't become arrogant, they became centered. Their decisions carried more weight, not because they argued harder, but because they believed deeper. The beauty of this script is that it addresses both sides of the struggle. It acknowledges that yes, understanding will come, but not through words. It will come through results. And until then, silence is not emptiness. It is protection. It guards your focus from distraction. It shields your confidence from erosion. It keeps your energy moving forward, not backward in endless loops of justification. You are not being secretive, you are being strategic. Just as a builder does not explain every nail before driving it home, you do not need to narrate every move to validate it. Action is its own language, and the longer you stay in alignment with this inner truth, the more natural it becomes to act without apology. You begin to trust that your path does not require consensus to be valid. You learn to carry your certainty like a quiet flame, one that doesn't need to be blown on by approval to keep burning. So from this moment forward, whenever you feel the old reflex rise, the need to explain, to clarify, to manage perception, pause, close your eyes if you can, breathe, and repeat, my results will speak. My silence will protect them. Do this not once, but consistently, until it becomes the default voice in your mind, because when your inner world is governed by clarity, your outer world will reflect it without a single unnecessary word. You may begin this practice believing that the benefit of speaking less and acting more is personal, that it simply preserves your energy, sharpens your focus, or protects your peace. And it does. But what most don't anticipate is how deeply your silence affects those around you, not through force or declaration, but through the quiet power of example. When you stop explaining your decisions, when you move with calm certainty and refuse to perform your purpose for approval, something subtle yet profound shifts in the atmosphere around you. People begin to treat you differently, not because you demanded it, but because your presence has changed. You are no longer reacting to their questions, their doubts, their need for justification. You are leading from a place of inner alignment, and that kind of stability is contagious. I've watched men and women who once felt invisible suddenly command attention, not by speaking louder, but by speaking less. Their words, once scattered and defensive, now carry weight because they are rare and deliberate. Their actions, once delayed by the need to convince, now unfold with momentum because they are no longer waiting for permission. And in time, those around them begin to mirror this shift. A colleague who used to challenge every move starts to accept decisions without debate. A family member who once questioned every boundary begins to respect them without discussion. A friend who expected constant updates stops asking for them because they've learned that when you do speak, it matters. This is the ripple effect of unshakable silence. It doesn't create distance, it creates respect. Not the kind earned through argument, but the kind earned through consistency. People may not always understand your path, but they begin to trust that you know where you're going. And that trust is not given lightly. It is given to those who demonstrate, over time, that they are not swayed by opinion, that their direction is not negotiable, that their commitment runs deeper than the need to be liked. I once observed a young leader in a struggling company who, after adopting this practice, transformed the culture of her team in less than 3 months. She stopped justifying her decisions in meetings. She stated them clearly, once, then moved forward. At first, others filled the silence with questions, assumptions, even resistance. But she held her ground, not with arrogance, but with quiet resolve. She didn't defend, she didn't over-clarify, she simply acted. And within weeks, the dynamic shifted. Team members began making their own decisions with more confidence. Meetings became shorter, more focused. People stopped seeking approval for every small choice because they had witnessed what was possible when someone trusted themselves enough to lead without commentary. That is the unseen power of silence. It doesn't just protect your energy, it elevates your influence. It teaches others how to treat you by showing them what you will no longer tolerate, the slow erosion of your authority through unnecessary explanation. And as you continue to live this way, you'll notice something even more remarkable. Others begin to follow not because you told them to, but because they want to be near the kind of strength that doesn't need to prove itself. They are drawn to the peace of a person who knows their purpose and moves with it, undistracted. So do not underestimate the impact of your restraint. Every time you choose silence over justification, you are not withdrawing from the world, you are leading it quietly, steadily, powerfully toward a new standard of strength. And in time, the ripples will reach further than you ever imagined. There is a sacred phase in every meaningful endeavor, a season, that must be lived in solitude, not because the world is unwelcoming, but because creation demands it. This is the time before the results are visible, before the proof is undeniable, before anyone outside yourself can see what you see. It is the quiet years of Edison in his lab, Ford in his workshop, Carnegie shaping his strategy in silence. No announcements, no explanations, no need for witnesses. They understood something most never learn. The most powerful work is done when no one is watching, not because it must be hidden, but because attention too soon distorts the process. When you begin to build something real, a business, a life of purpose, a legacy, you enter this phase naturally. But modern culture tempts you to skip it, to rush into the light before the foundation is set, to explain your dream before you've earned the right to speak of it with authority. And in doing so, you expose your vision to forces it cannot yet withstand: misunderstanding, doubt, even well-meaning advice that pulls you off course. The man who builds in public often ends up building for public approval, not personal truth. But the man who builds in silence builds for one audience, himself, and that is as it should be. I've seen too many promising starts dissolve not from failure, but from premature exposure, dreams spoken too early, plans dissected before they had strength, visions diluted by too many opinions. The moment you explain your goal to someone who isn't living it with you, you invite their limitations into your mind, their fears, their assumptions. And even if they say, "That's great," their energy may not carry the weight of true belief, so why give them access to what is still fragile? The long game does not reward the first to speak, it rewards the last to give up. It belongs to those who can endure the silence, who can work without applause, who can move forward even when no one acknowledges the distance they've traveled. This is not arrogance, it is patience. It is the discipline of trusting your inner compass when the outer world offers no landmarks. When Rockefeller began consolidating his rail interests, he did not hold press conferences. When Edison tested thousands of materials for the filament, he did not live stream his failures. They knew that explanation before completion is a distraction, and distraction is the enemy of mastery. You must learn to find satisfaction not in recognition, but in progress, not in being seen, but in becoming, because the world will not validate you until you are undeniable, and you cannot become undeniable if you keep stopping to explain why you're trying. So I ask you, are you willing to build for a season where only you know the full weight of what you're doing? Where your motivation comes not from likes, comments, or nods of approval, but from the quiet certainty that you are aligning with your purpose, one unseen action at a time. That is the test. And those who pass it do not need to announce their arrival, their results do it for them. The building without witnesses is not a punishment, it is a privilege. It is the purest form of creation, uncorrupted by performance, untainted by the need to be understood. And when you emerge from that season, stronger, sharper, fully formed, no explanation will be necessary. The world will finally see what you've always known, and in that moment, silence will have done its work. You were not placed on this earth to seek permission. You were placed here to fulfill a purpose so uniquely yours that no one else can define it for you, let alone judge its validity. And yet, I see so many of you bright, capable, driven, spending your most precious resource not on building, but on justifying, not on moving forward, but on looking back to see if others approve of the path you've taken. This is not humility. It is hesitation disguised as consideration. True humility knows its limits, but it also knows its calling. And when you have seen what you were meant to do, you do not stand at the edge of it explaining why you might jump. You jump. The world does not need your reasons. It needs your courage. It needs your work. It needs the thing only you can create, spoken not in words of defense, but in the language of action. I have walked with men who changed industries, who lifted nations, who built empires from nothing, not because they were the loudest, the most connected, or the most praised, but because they made a quiet decision early on their purpose was not up for debate. They stopped measuring their worth by the nods of others and began measuring it by the consistency of their effort, the depth of their conviction, the integrity of their next step. That is the mark of the unapologetic, not arrogance, not disregard for others, but an unwavering loyalty to one's own truth. They understand that no dream was ever realized by committee, no legacy built by consensus. Greatness moves alone at first. It bears the weight of misunderstanding because it knows that clarity comes not from explanation, but from completion. So I leave you with this. Stop borrowing other people's standards to measure your life. Stop shaping your decisions to fit their comfort. You do not owe the world an explanation for your ambition, your boundaries, or your timing. You owe it your best work. And that work cannot be done while you are still defending the right to begin. Let your silence become your strength. Let your focus become your statement. Let your results, when they come, as they will, be the only reply you ever need to give. The path ahead is not for the loud, but for the steady, not for the performers, but for the builders. And if you are willing to walk it without apology, without hesitation, without the need to be understood before you are finished, then you are already becoming the kind of person who does not wait for permission to change the world. You are already the one they will one day point to and say, "I remember when no one believed in him, and he never stopped." That is the power of the unapologetic, and it is yours if you choose to claim it. Key takeaways and action steps. Now that you've walked through this truth, not just with your mind, but with your instincts, you must act, because knowledge without application is only decoration. What you've learned here is not meant to be admired. It is meant to be lived. So let us distill it into clarity, and from clarity into motion. These are not vague suggestions. They are precise steps, forged in the same principle that guided Carnegie, Edison, and Ford, Organized thinking leads to organized action, and only action produces results. Begin today, not tomorrow, not when you feel ready, now. First, recognize the trigger. The moment you feel the urge to explain, when your voice shifts from stating to justifying, when you add because where none was asked, when you soften your decision with, I know this sounds crazy, but pause, that is not a small moment. That is the exact point where your power is at stake. Awareness is the first act of mastery. Name it silently. This is the habit. This is the fear. I see it. Time. Second, practice the one-sentence rule. When you must speak, limit yourself to one clear, unqualified statement. No disclaimers, no over-clarifying, no attempts to manage the reaction. Say what you mean, then stop. I'm making this move because it's aligned with my goal. Then change the subject. Then act. Repeat this until the reflex to over-explain weakens and the reflex to act strengthens. Third, take the 24-hour silence challenge. Pick one day tomorrow, if possible, and for 24 hours, do not justify any decision, large or small. No explanations for your choices, your boundaries, your goals. Respond with silence, a simple acknowledgement, or one sentence. Observe what happens inside you. The discomfort, the fear of being misunderstood, the urge to correct perception. That is where the real work lives. Write it down afterward. Learn from it. Fourth, install the inner script. Every morning, and every time you feel the old pull to defend yourself, repeat this phrase in your mind. My results will speak. My silence will protect them. Do not rush it. Let it settle. Let it become the voice that answers fear with resolve. Say it before conversations, before decisions, before you feel the need to prove yourself. Over time, it will become your default mindset. Fifth, measure progress by peace, not approval. The sign you are growing is not that more people understand you, it is that you care less whether they do. The deeper you move into your purpose, the quieter your need for external validation will become. Track this. When you make a decision and feel no urge to explain it, that is a victory. When you act and feel centered, not anxious, that is power. And finally, return to the long game. Remind yourself daily, the most meaningful work is done without witnesses. You do not need an audience to begin. You only need certainty. Build in silence. Act without apology. Let your focus be your compass, your discipline your voice. The world will notice when it can no longer ignore you, and when that day comes, you will not need to say a word. This is not a theory. It is a practice, and the man or woman who applies it consistently will outpace the one who merely understands it. So choose now. Will you continue to defend your path, or will you finally walk it? The answer is not found in words. It is found in what you do starting today. Remember, your success begins the moment you decide to act.